Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Buddyfight deck update video. So this is going to be an updated list on the budget version of Time Dragons. So Time Dragons originally came out in S-CBT03 and they were a really expensive deck, and they still are a pretty expensive deck as of the recording of this video. So any given card shouldn't cost you more than $5. So with all that being said, let's get into the updated list. So for the Buddy, I'm going to be keeping it at Holy Wehr Dragon because Holy Wehr Dragon is a pretty solid card, and what Holy Wehr Dragon does is it basically, when you Buddy call it, it basically buys you an extra turn, so that way you can try to stall out as long as you can to try to flip your God Clocks over into End Ruler Dragon. That's why Holy Wehr Dragon is going to be the Buddy. As far as the updates go that got updated and added to the deck as of the Climax booster, I'm running 4 copies of S. So counter, choose up to 1 card on your field for each time your flag is reversed during this fight. And for this turn, the chosen cards can't be destroyed or rested, and they can't have their abilities be nullified, and they can't have their souls be dropped by your opponent's card effects. If you choose 2 or more cards, you draw 2 cards. So this is just very strong because it just helps turn off the ability for the opponent to interact with you, on top of which you also get some additional card draw, and cheap forms of card draw is very powerful. Especially in the budget version of the deck, that's very important because we're going to be running the starter deck version of the Time Ruler Dragon, and his ability is based on attacks. So making sure the opponent can't stop our attacks is very important. Next, I'm going to be running 3 Kronos Reverse. So this is the spell null, where you pay 2 gauge, and then you nullify the spell your opponent's trying to cast. Then, if your flag is reversed 4 or more times during this fight, your opponent can't cast spells with the same name as that card. So it keeps them from trying to reuse the same spell if they have multiple copies for the rest of the turn, which, again, turning off their plays is very powerful. Next, I'm running 3 copies of Castra. So you can only cast this card during attack on your opponent's turn, and if a Time Dragon is on your field. And then counter, nullify the attack. Then if your flag is reversed during this fight, put the top 2 cards of your deck into your gauge. And if your flag is reversed 2 or more times, you gain 2 life. If your flag is reversed 3 or more times, you draw a card, and this card can't be nullified. It's just a very solid defense spell that is doing a lot based on the stages of the game you're going to be playing it in. And then as far as the last big update, I'm running 2 copies of Kronos Syn Finale. You can only cast this card if your opponent has 12 life or less, and your flag is reversed 4 or more times, which basically means you're going to be in End Ruler Dragon. And then its cast cost is just pay 2 gauge and deal 12 instances of 1 damage to your opponent. If they don't have any blanket fog effects, this is most likely going to end up killing them. And then as far as the rest of the list goes, it's just mostly the same as before, with a couple of tweaks here or there based on how the market was reacting or just what fits better in with the deck. So 4 copies of Holy Wehr Dragon. Again, it's just buying you that extra turn so that way you can try to flip into the End Ruler Dragon. 4 copies of the starter deck Eon, because he comes in the starter deck, and I'm assuming you have already bought at least 2 of the starter deck, so that way you could get the proper ratios of all of the starter deck cards that are needed to play the deck. But his ability versus the secret pack one is it's basically just on attack, which is why S is so important. So when he attacks, you nullify the abilities of a card on your opponent's field and put it to the bottom, and then he's got double attack and soul guard. And then the deck does need 4 copies of any Time Dragon Dragod. He's the cheapest one available to us. Next, I'm running 3 copies of Octho. He's just a hand trap that nullifies effects. Next, I'm running 3 copies of Tubocas. He is a good way to gain life at counter speed, on top of which he has another counter ability. He's just very, very effective at removing any type of card, on top of which he has a little bit of synergies with some of the stuff in the deck, because Eon, his Kronos Wind ability, refills his souls, so at worst, you could always just sacrifice some souls in Eon. Next, I'm playing 3 copies of Kronos Trophe. You're just going to be using this to put a card from your opponent's field to the bottom of the deck. The other option is pretty good, where you could return all souls on your opponent's field back to the deck and shuffle it, but most of the time you're just going to want to try to remove the card. 2 copies of Kronos Bayonet Augur, again, more cheap card draw, and then because you're time dragons, you have the added benefit where if your flag's reversed 2 or more times, you draw an additional card. And the nice part is it doesn't cost any gauge, it just costs 1 life. Next, I'm running 2 copies of Kronos Syn Epita. You basically charge a gauge and then tutor out a Time Dragon Dragod from your deck, which, because Kronos Syn Finale is also a Time Dragon Dragod, you also can search that out if you don't need to search Eon out. Next, 3 copies of Kronos Perior. So this is just the rest spell, and it rests based on how many times your flag is reversed. 3 copies of Time Soldier Spigar, because he is just a good way of adding cards to your hand, because he looks at the top 3 when he's called, and then if your flag is reversed, it just adds them to the gauge, so he's just very, very solid. 2 copies of Buddyfighters Without Limits. This is just your anti-discard card. 2 copies of Taylor Luna. So Taylor Luna does a lot for the deck and synergizes also with Time Dragon Tubocas, but basically, if your flag is reversed, this card size is reduced by 3, so it could be any of your flag parts. And then when this card attacks or is destroyed, if your flag is reversed during this fight, destroy up to 1 card on your opponent's field. Then if your flag is reversed 4 or more times, which means you're an end ruler, you get to put the card to the bottom of the opponent's deck instead of destroying it. Next, 3 of the set spell Kronos Syn Richarlle. This just helps your abilities not get nullified, and then when a card is returned to the hand or deck by your card effects, you also get to put the top card of your deck into your gauge and draw a card. Again, more gauge gaining, more draw cards, and then it's mostly there just to help your card's abilities not get nullified. 2 Kronos Royruse. So this is the fake impact of the deck where you basically just get an extra attack phase. And then lastly, 2 copies of Kronos Round Shield, just for some more added defense. And this one gains you gauge for each time your flag is reversed on top of nullifying the attack. You could play Lost World. Lost World has its budget and not budget builds, so it just depends on how much you want to invest in Lost World or how much you already have invested in Lost World, on top of which how much you want to invest in the Time Dragons deck as a whole. So Lost World is very good as an option. As far as some other options of cards you could run go, you could run Time General Douglas, so he's just a card to fit into the soul of one of your Time Dragons, and then he gives them an added benefit of Penetrate and 5,000 power for each of your flags that have been reversed this fight. So as the game prolongs, the power will increase when he's in the soul, and then you could stack these if you really feel like it, but I don't necessarily see it worth stacking, but it's just a thing you could do. And then, like Douglas, you could run Time Guardian Milgaius. So he just does a similar effect, except he's on the defensive side, where he gives it a defensive buff of 5,000 for each time your flag is reversed, on top of which he gives the card counterattack. You could also run Time General Saxonia. If a Dragod is on your field, the size of this card is reduced by 3, so it's effectively a size 0. And then it has a counteract ability. Choose a Time Dragon on your field. You may pay 1 gauge. If you do, stand the card up, and then you can only use this ability once per turn. So you're really just using this to stand up your Time Dragons, so that way they can continue to attack. You can run Time Scout Vol, so if this card is on your field, it gets plus 2,000 power and plus 2,000 defense for each time your flag is reversed this fight. So he could get pretty big for being size 0, on top of which when this card attacks, You may put one card from your drop zone into the soul of a time dragon monster on your field. If you do, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So again, he's just a good way of adding cards to the soul. It fills up the soul for defensive purposes and combos well with Douglas and Mill. And he gains a life and draws a card on attack, which can be pretty good. Next, you can run Time Scout Bull. So when this card enters the field, put the top card of your deck into your gauge. Then if your flag is reversed 2 or more times, you draw a card. So he's just a gauge and draw card on summon. Not terrible. And then you could run Kronos Quartzment. Put up to 1 Time Dragon monster from your drop zone to your hand. Then if your flag is reversed 2 or more times during this fight, you charge 2 gauge, and if your flag is reversed 3 or more times this fight, you gain 3 life. So this is just a good way at recovering a card from the drop zone that you need, as long as it is a Time Dragon monster. So for the most part, that is the general rundown on the budget version of Time Dragons as of the Climax booster, trying to spend as little as possible while still making the deck as effective as possible. The biggest difference between the two builds is realistically the budget build is more aggressive and soul-based, where the not budget version is going to be more defense focused and disruption based. I hope you find this video very informative. There are a ton of different other options of different cards you could run in the deck, but I just wanted to stick to some of the more basic stuff just to try to keep things as budget friendly as possible, because this can be a very expensive deck. Don't forget to hit that like button, and feel free to leave a comment down below of other cards you find are cheap and effective in Time Dragons. So don't forget to like and subscribe for more Buddy Fight content, and I will see you in the next video.